Would like to wel I'd like to welcome everybody to this expert workshop. Welcome on behalf of IEA Bioenergy. I'm Luc Pelkmans. I'm technical coordinator of IEA Bioenergy. So this workshop is about socioeconomic impacts of bioenergy. We're often talking about climate impacts, environmental risks of bioenergy, but what's also clear is that there are socioeconomic impacts as well. These can be positive, so you can have benefits on that side, sometimes also negative. It all depends on the type of biomass, the bioenergy type, the circumstances, regional circumstances also. But what's really clear is that the topic needs to get more focus also. And of course, when you talk about the impacts, you also need to look at, how can you actually measure this? And that's the topic of this workshop. So it's an expert workshop. So we have a presentation from Warren, but we also expect some input from your side, so that's also useful for us. So would like to give the word to Warren. Warren will be of Queen's University in Canada, who's leading a study for us on this. He's making an overview report on what is known, what do we know already. And his report will also be the basis for future work in IEA Bioenergy on this topic. So I hand it over to Warren and invite you to share your presentation.
Thank you very much, Luc, and thanks to everybody for being online. I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see what I see. So the purpose of this project is to look at the various indicators available to measure sustainability and particularly social and economic sustainability of bioenergy systems. Advance the slides. The rationale behind this, we know that bioenergy systems play an important role in any sort of sustainable energy future, but that in order for these systems to be sustainable, they must be managed properly. And I think everybody online has probably had the experience of looking at studies or reports that have documented negative impacts of bioenergy development. And in fact, there's a lot of narratives going on right now, both in the scientific literature, although I would argue that it's a little bit clear in the scientific literature, and in the media, where I think the message is often clouded and where there's a lot of rhetoric happening. We know that the environmental sustainability of bioenergy supply chains is being challenged by some of the work that has been done, and that the social and economic sustainability of systems is also questioned. And some of this comes back to the indicators that we use to measure these systems. The way that we've set today up, it's approximately a 2-hour session. I'm going to take about the next 20 minutes to provide an overview of the report, and this will be a high-level overview, and it will be an overview that glances across a number of different points. For some of you online, that'll be a little frustrating because I know that you're experts and you know this area really well, but we're trying to bring everybody online up to speed. The most important parts of this workshop or session today are really the breakout sessions that we've set up, each about half an hour long, with some report back periods. And what we're looking forward to is getting your input into what are the key indicators we should be pursuing, and how can we address key challenges, what kind of solutions are out there. So that's really the purpose of this meeting, and during those breakouts we'll be taking notes and pulling together lots of ideas. The goals of our study was to update the current state of knowledge regarding benefits associated with bioenergy production, to determine which indicators are being most widely used to track various social, economic, and environmental impacts. And I'm not going to talk about environmental impacts today, but so many of the reports that are done, the social, the economic, and the environmental impacts are intertwined. People are relating them together, so we've pulled it all out. And to relate those indicators to the various indicators that have been proposed associated with the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's a reason that we're going in that direction, and I'll get into that as we go through the presentation. What was the approach that we used? Certainly a structured lit review, and that lit review has been informed by expert perspectives, mostly through IEA Bioenergy. Basically, we looked back over the last 15 years and looked at a whole lot of studies, more than 100 studies, and the indicators that were being used to track social and economic sustainability of bioenergy systems. While we were doing that work, we brought those things into alignment with the various SDGs. And so that's the framework that we're going to use to report back on today. Today, what we hope to do is to go through, review and prioritize some of those indicators, identify gaps, and Keith has already identified some gaps for us, so we're in good shape. We're going to see some gaps as we go, and then to discuss some barriers and solutions to tracking the indicators going forward. I don't think I have to go into depth talking about the Sustainable Development Goals or their background. This is the second iteration of these types of global goals, and they're in effect over the next 5-6 years until we come to the next period. There are 17 goals currently, and you can see them all up on the screen. And obviously, each of those goals measure or report on some aspect of sustainability. The reason that we find these important and useful as a framing mechanism is firstly because they're holistic. It does cover all aspects of sustainability, and that's been tested through the development of these goals. But more importantly, governments are starting to get aligned around reporting using these goals. There are indicators, and anybody who's done work in this space knows there's more than 200 indicators that have been proposed to track progress towards sustainable development goals. Some of those indicators are starting to be tracked more regularly, and this is something where we might be able to take advantage of data being collected by governments for the purpose of reporting on the SDGs in order to better understand the sustainability of these bioenergy supply chains, bioenergy provision systems. Work was done, again, partially through the IEA to look at which of the SDGs were most closely related to bioenergy sustainability. The references at the bottom, Blair et al., it came out in 2021, and I have the full reference that I can provide. Essentially, there are 7 SDGs that are very closely related to the sustainability of bioenergy systems: zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, climate action, and life on land. So I think I said 7. That's 8 of the SDGs are very closely related. There are some that have moderate connections: no poverty, good health and well-being. Again, it's maybe I've double counted something here. Reduced inequality and sustainable cities and infrastructure. And I think I have one hidden under everybody's pictures, which is clean water and sanitation. And then finally, there are SDGs that are less likely to be linked to bioenergy sustainability, and those were found to be education, equality, life below water, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. Partnerships for the goals, for any of you who do work with the SDGs, is one of the trickiest ones to try to relate. So we did use this as an initial sort of a triage as we were looking at the various measures or indicators related to sustainability of systems. Now, what are the key social indicators that we've looked at? Again, I don't have a whole lot of time here to go through this, so I'm going to take a high-level view and walk through some of them. One of the first ones that always comes up is food pricing and availability. I think we're well past the kind of simplistic food versus fuel arguments that were very big at the beginning of the millennia. Lots of people were writing on this topic. We do know that bioenergy systems, if implemented, in the wrong way, can have big impacts on food pricing in local areas. It can have big impacts on what is coming out of agricultural systems or how land is being used. But if they're brought into place properly, a bioenergy system can have a minimal or almost no impact on food pricing. It really depends on the situation. And I think that this is something that may be frustrating or difficult for some people to really wrap their heads around. It's very context specific. We found good examples of systems in well-integrated, well-developed agricultural zones where the introduction of bioenergy or bioenergy supply chains really did not have a big impact on food pricing at all. But there were other examples, good examples in the literature of more isolated systems. Think of islands or more remote countries where introducing bioenergy can have a big impact on what's available locally and how much is available for local consumption. And that does have a direct impact on pricing. So this is an important sort of a concept to wrap our heads around. And it plays out again and again with the different indicators. It's very context specific. That's why having strong indicators that we can use in consistent fashion is important as we look at these systems. Access to and cost of energy. Again, what a lot of studies have found is that the development of a bioenergy supply chain may not benefit local people that are actually participating in the supply chain. If you're producing fuels, those fuels may be taken into international trade or global trade, utilized in other places, therefore not providing any sort of direct energy benefit. There may be problems with getting access to the energy that's being generated just because of a lack of infrastructure. And there can be costs.
Warren, can I interrupt? I think we've lost your screen, so can you try sharing it again?
Yes, I can. Hang on 1 second. I will do that again. Now, let me know if you can see it now.
Yeah, we can see it.
It's up?
Yep.
Okay, do let me know if something goes wrong.
Okay, we'll do.
And I'll jump in and we'll fix it. So access to cost of energy, I've covered off. Land use and land tenure. This is a major concern, particularly in places where we're seeing consortia, industry buying up land or taking over the tenure of land. So being able to track this can be a very important measure. Now, what's happening in a lot of industrialized nations is that our agricultural systems are moving towards industry scale farming rather than family farms or small landholders. But we're seeing the same sort of impacts in some other parts of the world, and maybe bioenergy systems are accelerating that. So again, this becomes a major concern. Compliance with regulations. So a big part of being sustainable means meeting the local rules, whether those rules are environmental, whether these rules are to do with ownership, whether these rules have to do with the use of chemicals or the use of different harvesting systems on the landscape. So making sure that these bioenergy systems are compliant with local regulation. And of course, we're seeing a lot of that now being enforced through corporations who are taking their ESG, their environment, sustainability, governance piece, and they are applying it to their supply chains and tracking things through their supply chains. Not many people have talked about this, but it does show up, the idea that we should be embracing the circular economy, the reuse and recycling of materials within the bioenergy chains. I think that this will become more important as we go forward. Bioenergy systems have typically sort of ignored this because biomass is a circular economy. You know, we get regrowth and regeneration all the time, but how materials are used and reused is becoming more important. Human health, particularly mortality and usually from indoor smoke, is an issue. This really comes up in places where people are using small cook stoves in an indoor system, using biomass for heat or for cooking. You can run into substantive issues with human health and with mortality associated with those systems. Access to clean water. So bioenergy systems can use a lot of water, and the propagation of either energy cropping or different types of agricultural or forest practices can change access to water on the landscape. So who gets access to water and whether or not that water is clean, or whether industrial systems are starting to impact water quality, becomes really important. Risk of catastrophe. This has not shown up a lot, but some people have talked about this as a benefit that can come with bioenergy systems. A bioenergy system may be less likely to succumb to some of the agricultural blights. You know, think of different diseases or pests that can impact agricultural crops. A lot of bioenergy crops may be a little bit more resistant to that or resilient through those systems, which can help landowners and help governments to manage some of those impacts. But we also know that there are things like wildfires, and there are things like big pest outbreaks, like the mountain pine beetle here in Canada and in the States that has decimated big parts of forests. These are catastrophes that can really interrupt the bioenergy system and affect the overall sustainability of those systems. Finally, information sharing and public opinion. It's important that there be public buy-in into these systems. And although this is not something that is being widely tracked or widely used as an indicator of sustainability, some people have proposed this as an important component of these systems. So this is a summary of these social measures. They're not ranked, but they are organized. And you can see down the side some of the literature that has touched on these things. It's not an exhaustive list, but it does give you a sense of who has been writing about some of these indicators or these ideas. We can go back to our framework and look at which of these SDGs these bioenergy indicators map to or track to. You can see that SDGs 2, 7, and 12 are very closely related to the first 7 indicators that we've got on this list. Or SDGs 3, 6, and 11 are more closely related to those 5 indicators that are on the list. And then finally, the public opinion piece ties mostly to SDG 17, which, as I said, is a really challenging one. Partnerships for the goals, partnerships to move forward on sustainability. Now, I've organized these indicators in that order, but that's not necessarily a priority list. That just ties it back to the framework that has been proposed before. And gives us a little bit of organization to start with. We've also gone through and looked at which proposed SDG indicators could link back to each of these specific bioenergy indicators. And I'm not going to run all the way through that list, but what you can see is that in most of these instances, there is a relatively close SDG indicator that could be adopted to better understand what these impacts are. Now, what I think, or what my hypothesis is basically, is that as these data are being collected on a more regular basis, that we will have a better set of data from which to work and to be able to understand the overall sustainability of these systems. Not all of these indicators are being tracked on a regular basis by every country. For instance, Canada has only just now started tracking some of the indicators that are on here, and there are still indicators that Canada is not tracking. And it is possible, Keith, that we are missing some of the foundational studies that are out there, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I'm going to take a couple of minutes. I don't have much time in my presentation slot left, but to talk about the key economic indicators. Again, we've already talked a little bit about access to and cost of energy, but particularly cost of energy as a portion of household budgets, cost of energy as a portion of government budgets. This becomes an important component of putting together a picture of the economic sustainability of these systems. And it does come back a little bit to the idea of, how much is it going to cost us to be able to put these systems into place, and how will that compare to the existing systems? How these systems relate to income and to overall economic productivity is also a really, really important picture. For the most part, we've talked about GDP at a regional basis, and that does show up a fair bit in the literature. Thinking about income at a more personal level and how this affects individuals and households. People have explored that, but the studies are, well, they're scattered, and there's very few comprehensive studies out there that give us a lot of insight into what's going on. Jobs and employment and the number of hours that are being worked, all pretty key indicators of the economic sustainability. Some people would argue that this is a measure of social sustainability. Again, we've categorized this using the SDG definitions, and that has shifted this more into the economic category. I'm willing to have a debate about that, because that's something that a lot of people might not agree with. Investment in research and development. Not many groups are looking at this as a key indicator or a key tool to measure bioenergy sustainability, but there are a few papers that have looked at what countries are investing and what different different groups or organizations are investing into this area. The cost of land and the impact of developing industrial bioenergy systems or even artisanal bioenergy systems on land pricing has become an issue. In a lot of parts of the world, land pricing is becoming a dominant issue in conversations because cost of land has gone up so much. Bioenergy systems are just one of the systems that are affected by this. Community benefits. We hear a lot about community benefit in the studies that are done, and people have a lot of different ideas about how to best measure this. I've already talked about GDP and regional GDP. If there's access to the data required to be able to calculate that at a regional or relatively local scale, this can be a good way of determining what kind of benefit has been seen. At the same time, it isn't always easy to get access to that data and to those inputs so that you can track it. Other people have looked at whether there are community benefit agreements in place, or is there some sort of a cash transfer settlement? Is it impacting local tax revenues or local municipality revenues? I think this is a really important one to measure, but there isn't a lot of consistency in how it's being done. Training and requalification of the workforce. So obviously, there can be real benefits in introducing some of these systems because it provides jobs, and with the jobs comes training, and with training come other opportunities. Looking at how much training comes with different bioenergy systems is important. And again, it's very context specific. There are good examples of the introduction of bioenergy systems that have led to overarching benefits where education levels and training have gone up. There are also good examples of places where the jobs that have been created have been fleeting or where the jobs have really been at a subsistence level. And that is a challenge going forward. Unpaid time collecting biomass. This is a critical issue, particularly for women, because in many parts of the world, women are tasked with the collection of biomass for a household or even for small industrial type applications. And in many cases, that's unpaid time. And so being able to track that and look at what the impacts might be of modifying these systems is important. So again, we've got 12 indicators that we've identified as we've gone through, and there's some selected literature attached to that. Now I did see a comment come through. Yeah, and Keith, I do appreciate that. There is some really interesting work being done in certain nations on tracking community benefits. And so, yeah, I think that we'll hopefully be able to bring some of that in. Again, the economic measures that are most highly correlated with certain SDGs are these ones at the top, related to clean and affordable energy and related to growth, and some investments in R&D, that side of things. More moderately correlated, would be the trends in land pricing. And again, the community benefit actually comes in a little bit lower. I was surprised at that, but I think it's just where community benefit shows up within the SDG list of indicators. So again, there are some discrepancies that we will probably need to address here. And finally, the bottom two are in training and requalification and in the unpaid time. Now, one would certainly argue that these are important. The fact that these are less correlated SDGs doesn't mean that these are less important indicators going forward. And again, we've gone through and identified the SDG indicators that are being tracked that can talk back to this. And actually, for some of these indicators, what has been proposed under the SDG framework would be highly valuable for informing the sustainability of bioenergy systems if they're being tracked on a regular enough basis and at a level of detail that is sufficient. And as an example, under the economic productivity or the jobs, you can see that SDG indicators have been proposed that would be tracked by sex, by gender, by persons with disabilities. And if that type of information was available, it would provide a lot of insight into what is happening within these systems. That's not being consistently tracked, unfortunately, not in most countries. And so, although it's been proposed, and although colleagues that are working with sustainability have thought about this, it's not showing up in the data that is available. So that was just under 20 minutes, which is exactly what I was supposed to talk to. This is the moment when we can ask some questions, and I do see some things coming into the chat. So I'm just going to look in the chat, but if people want to raise their hands, and maybe I'll stop sharing for a moment just so that I can see screens more easily. If people want to raise their hands or ask questions or throw in ideas at this moment, we do have a few minutes to do that. Keith, yep, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. This is great. I really do appreciate this webinar and the effort. I think it's really important that we include and think about the socioeconomic effects of bioenergy, and measuring socioeconomic effects of a bioenergy supply chain is a little different than defining socioeconomic indicators. I think they're
Yeah,
related, but anyway, this is something we've worked on for 25 years at Oak Ridge or more. And so I've been throwing some stuff in the chat because I'm going to have to leave in a few minutes, unfortunately, to run and then go to another meeting. Um, I'll stay as long as I can, though. But I did want to share that there is a lot of work done in this area, and one thing I want to emphasize is that there's an ASTM standard that
yeah,
was published. It's an international standard about a process, an iterative process of engaging with all the stakeholders to define with them what's important to them, and recognize that you can't measure everything. It's expensive to measure everything, but if you agree on one or two things with stakeholders that are really important, you'll find stakeholders are going to help you measure it. And if there's transparency in that process and a commitment to do it, I think that can really work and can make a difference locally. Now, that's not going to appease the people that are criticizing bioenergy from up high and talking about food security and stuff like that. And I don't think we're going to ever appease all of those people. Some of them just have certain beliefs stuck in their head, and they don't want to really look at the data. But since I worked with USAID for over 24 years in the field, we were trying to conserve trees while helping people. And bioenergy was a tool to help do both things, to improve food security and conserve forests and systems. So I just, yeah. I'll share some more things in the chat maybe, or wherever you want
yeah,
things shared. Uh, I put in the chat, just for in case people didn't see it, the community benefit plans I think is a really interesting thing, and we're learning.
yeah,
You got to be careful about how they're structured. You got to be careful about who gets to decide what's in it. That process is important, of representation and participation. And you got to be careful about how you sign an agreement or a contract, because that can create a whole legal quagmire later that actually neither party benefits from in the end. So we're learning about good ways and not so good ways to do those. But I think they're a very interesting approach to engage the community, to ensure that engagement occurs, and to at least talk about the issues and get them out on the table, and hopefully have some commitment to address some priorities within a community as you invest in a project there.
yeah.
So I'll stop there. I have my favorite three indicators based on my experience, but I'll share those a little later. Thanks.
Well, it'd be great if you could, Keith, and I really appreciate that. I'm glad you raised the issue of the standard. That is absolutely important, and the process of identifying indicators for a specific study, I think, absolutely has to involve that back and forth with communities. And I think that the indicators do change as you go study to study and place to place, right? Like this is also going to be true, that there are places where measuring jobs is going to be really, really important, and it might be the overriding concern. There'll be other places where that might not actually be the main issue. And I hope I didn't give the impression that we were trying to come up with a one size fits all. So
Okay.
I'm glad that you stressed that, because that isn't what we're trying to do. What we are trying to do is to talk about, within this breadth, this panoply of, I've put up 25 different indicators now. Are there some standardized approaches and some key indicators that we want to see more of as we go forward in the literature, and particularly for those of us that are working from the academic or research perspective? Are there ways that we can standardize the way that we report? Hopefully that makes sense, but I really appreciate your input.
Yep.
And
And I'll
maybe
just
I'll,
say that you're
yeah,
right. Their standards and being able to measure consistently is critically important, and that's part of the
yeah,
problem we have. And some indicators allow that, and some do not. And so yeah, I'll stop there. And not, yeah, I've spoken enough. Thank you.
no, thank you, Keith. And I saw Heather first and then Harry, so maybe I can get Heather, then Harry, then Biljana.
Yeah, no, Keith, I like what you said. If you, I'll riff off what you were talking about, and then we can maybe have a further conversation, because I really love what you were saying about a community-oriented and community-driven definition of indicators, and especially here in Canada as well, when we're dealing with Indigenous nations, like we have over 600 First Nations in Canada. And so for us at the Canadian Forest Service, we're called to have a distinctions-based approach.
Yeah.
So that means we should never try to say that it's standardized when we're talking about Indigenous nations. We want to lift up the benefits of diversity, because like that's more of a qualitative social science approach, but it's to say that case studies sometimes resist aggregation, and that's a good thing, you know. And the other thing is, I'll put forward one of my favorite indicators is energy independence. Is the thing that I've been hearing on the ground, which is kind of a meld of your two things, which is to say that is the bioenergy being used to fuel and energize the community from which that biofuel comes?
Yep.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no, so Heather, thanks so much for that. It is really important that we remember that we're, again, not trying to standardize everything and not trying to put everything into the same box. Really, this is just more about how we look at these different approaches and try to identify some of the commonalities, so that in some cases we can do some comparisons, because there will be times when we need to compare different systems to see which ones make sense and which ones don't. And having some of that insight will help, but I appreciate that. Harry.
Flashbacks to criteria and indicators from sustainable forest management, where you end up with long lists of things, and I'm sure, Warren, this is familiar. I thought, because Keith, we're going to lose you. I thought two useful things. Context specific, and again, you guys are the experts on this, but are there 2 or 3 major contexts so one can think about either the nature of the energy system, the type of biomass being used, that kind of helps, develop like for like something? I mean, we're familiar with using residue from forest waste or slash. It can be different than in Africa, or agricultural biomass versus energy crops. And then, Keith, again, for people that have been working on this for a long time, if you do have particular indicators that float to the surface, I think it's really valuable just to kind of get that list and parse through it, because you've sorted through that long laundry list of everything and said these are useful. And again, to go back, Warren, presumably part of this is you're looking for the trade-offs. I mean, 2 things. What's a benefit? And so what are the key trade-offs? Because, secondary and tertiary effects are just impossible to measure.
That's right. And people have done this many times in the past. I think the value of what we're trying to do today is not so much to identify the best indicators, because that will change from system to system, but to get talking about which challenges we want to start taking on in terms of measuring. And actually, Keith just threw a comment into our chat, standard methods to consistently measure indicators. And that becomes more important, so as an example, if we're going to measure jobs, how do we define the jobs, and how do we define the boundaries by which a direct or an indirect job is measured? And, is this temporary or permanent jobs? Like, how do we report that back? Because anybody who's done any work in that space knows that the numbers can be all over the place and can be inflated. Good. Yes, Biljana.
So I will throw a little bit of European flair to this discussion. So it's context related very much. And socioeconomic, what is sustainable actually is defined by law in in the European Union. So it is sometimes very rigid and very, I would even dare to say, superficial, because there had to be compromises. As Keith was saying, it is too expensive to monitor, to collect all this data. And then for what? It will be valid for 1 year and the next year it's gone. So we had to compromise in the policy framing, because we have integrated sustainability criteria of bioenergy in the law. And it has trade-offs, because it is not so adaptable to the context. So sometimes we miss the, like I said, a birth of socioeconomic benefit because it's not happening. But sometimes we prevent. So we have decided that it's better to prevent than feel sorry. So what is also important, what I wanted to highlight, that when we look at these indicators and socioeconomic benefits that could have happened and we place them in the context, this context might have another layer, which is policy. So social acceptance, if we say it's what is acceptable by law, so that could be the higher social acceptance level that we can have for bioenergy. So just to give this little bit discussion, that scientifically proven or indicators might not be taken up in the policy. And then this policy is also directing the energy modeling and the plans, and then greenhouse gas emission savings and all these investments. So it is very careful. One has to be very careful when framing policy. And if you want to embed socioeconomic into policy, to be flexible enough. And because all this, if it's in the European Union law, very few things stay.
Thanks for that. And I do think that, yes, how we address some of these issues today will have lessons back for the policy side, important lessons back for the policy side. And I think that, this conversation around these questions is just underscoring, how important it is that we do come up with some of these common approaches. And hopefully today, we'll triage through the indicator list. That's our first exercise that we're going to undertake. But then we're going to talk about some of those challenges and opportunities going forward. And I think that will really inform some of these points. Okay. I hope people are still hearing me. I think we can jump into our exercise. Now, can people hear me? Just can somebody give a thumbs up? Yes, good.
Yes.
Just making sure. Things went very quiet for a moment. So I'm going back into my slideshow.
Just a second, I have still to open the breakout rooms. So you will be moved in 4 different rooms.
Okay.
Just a few seconds, you will be moved, and then you will start presenting and recording maybe. But if you want to explain first.
Yeah, give me a minute to explain the exercise. And this has been mailed out. There are 2 slides for each of the activities. In this first activity, what we'd like each group to do, and there are 4 groups, will be to take a moment to introduce yourselves to each other. So this is a networking opportunity. We'd like you to say hello to your colleagues. There will be a rapporteur, so you don't need to pick a rapporteur. We have a member of our group that will be in each of the breakout rooms, and that person will act as a rapporteur. And then we're going to ask you to start prioritizing indicators and asking you to identify your top 3 most important indicators at least. If there are gaps in the list, we'd like to hear that and report back on that. And let me stress, just based on the conversation that we've had, the purpose of this exercise is not really to come up with 3 really good indicators and that's all we want to talk about. the purpose here is to help us prioritize our work in standardizing approaches to tracking specific types of indicators. And I think that goes back to Keith's comment in our chat, that we're not trying to standardize the indicators themselves, but rather approaches. But to do that, we do need to triage and come up with a priority list. And that's where we're looking for your input. So there are 4 groups. So groups 1 and 3, the odd number rooms, we're asking if you could look at those social indicators. And groups 2 and 4, the even number rooms, we're asking if you can look at the economic indicators. But again, if there are things that you want to mention or throw in to either list, we're happy to take those. So now I think we can go to the breakout rooms.
Maybe just to mention, because we
Yeah.
originally we had foreseen 5 groups, but some people have not shown up. So
Okay.
we will have 4 groups, and normally we have one person assigned per group who's kind of moderating or taking the notes and making sure that the recordings are going on.
Yes.
And so there's one group with you, Warren, one group with me, one group with Biljana then, and one group with Andrea. So I hope it's okay for everybody.
Yes. Thanks for that, Luke. So one of us will lead each of these groups that go out, and each of these breakouts will take about 20 or so minutes, 25 minutes. That will give us lots of time to chat about these issues. So now I think we're ready to go to our breakouts.
Okay,
So
opening the breakout rooms now.
So what's the exact timing that we come back?
We will come back at 9:15,
Yeah, so
or 15
exactly
minutes past the hour for
15 minutes
everybody.
past the hour.
Yeah.
So 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, opening.
Great. The main session, and I'm mindful that some people have had to leave, and that we may have lost a few people along the way. I'd like to call on each of the rapporteurs or reporters from the breakout groups to give us a little bit of an update on their conversations. We do have a second breakout scheduled after this to go back and start talking about challenges and opportunities with actually addressing the measuring of the indicators, the tracking of these indicators. But first we want to talk about what the key ones are. And Biljana, can I start with you, since
Yes.
I know you have to go to another thing?
Thank you so much. So I had pleasure to speak with representatives that had because it's context related. It's always important from what glasses we are looking at these indicators. So we had 2 persons that we have diverse European experience and one from India. And the group, so what is very nice that it was very homogeneous in the answers. So we have indicated which one are relevant and also which are irrelevant. So what we have agreed that the relevant is the most relevant, like the first is the number 2, energy diversity, access to clean energy. And then on the second place, we have 3 indicators because depending on the context, we agree that these are kind of something to look at. So these are the indicators 3, 4, and 6.
Okay.
And then we had the third place was number 11.
Okay.
But then we had number 7 that was in one side irrelevant, but on other side relevant. And that was related actually to the policy. That is finding competing use for biomass.
Okay.
Maybe not the policy, but maybe the options, maybe, you know, the mindset that is looking for alternatives for biomass use, like circular economy approaches. So that's very important. And then from the irrelevant, it is impressively how we agreed on this, because I wanted to have this anonymity. So what we defined that it's completely irrelevant is the indicators 10, 9, 8. And we actually wanted to group this one and rename them in well-being, like social indicator well-being. So we wanted, because they're very close to each other. So we wanted to, and then to make it a little bit more neutral, because it doesn't have to be negative. So we can, for instance, improve well-being by installing bioenergy plant or getting bioenergy, but we also can reduce, because we would find inappropriate technology or mismatch of biomass to that technology, because it would be too wet, for instance, and then it would be too much of particle matter. So that would be well-being, could be on and off. So that was 10, 9, and 8.
8, yeah.
But so, and then we had also something that number 1 was definitely out, and 12, 13, and number 3. And number 3, you will see it in the relevant and irrelevant, because it's decentralized. So it could be local small-scale biomass that will not require so much infrastructure as a large scale. So that is relevant, irrelevant. And 5 was this so-so, which is trends in land use comparison. And we would combine this is regarding the gap. So we would combine 4 and 5 with alternative land use, and the 1, 4 and 5, and the alternative land use. And that's from also the relevant 2, then second place 3, 4, 6, third place 11, 7 optional, context related, and then all these irrelevant that I said. But what we will have indicated as a gap is to accumulate these 8, 9, and 10 into well-being, that can be plus and minus, and also accumulate 5 and 4 as a land use change. And yes, 12 was risk of a catastrophe.
Yeah.
We don't see that we would like to make it a little bit more neutral, because it could be also prevention of, I don't know, flooding or forest fire management. So maybe we didn't find the name, but to rename it somehow, because it doesn't have to be negative. So this is from our side.
Thanks for that. So maybe I'll go next, because we were the other social indicator table or breakout group. Our group, there was a fair bit of consistency in that most people felt that particulate emissions, or air quality, I guess you could say, was a critical part or a critical indicator, and maybe one of the most important indicators to track. I saw that from most of our respondents, that was one of the key issues that they wanted to highlight. Risk of catastrophe, or actually I really like what you said, Biljana. It's not the risk, it's managing that risk, and it's using these systems to reduce risk. But that was a second key issue that had come up, and again, we saw that from a number of the people that were in our group. We talked a little bit about food versus fuel. It wasn't consistent, so that number 1, the whole issue of food. We also talked about land use and land use change, and I agree that some of that could be bundled together. I think that there is some advantage to that. Things that were maybe less important or harder to quantify, issues around infrastructure access. We felt that that was a little bit harder. Public opinion, we were divided. So our public opinion was divided on public opinion as its use as an indicator. Things that were missing, energy security was raised, and then the cost of CO2 mitigation, although officially that would probably be an economic sustainability indicator. Those were the biggest ones, I think, that came up. So that, I think that summarizes most of what we had said. Maybe I can ask Andrea or Luke to report back on your tables, so the economic tables. Maybe Luke first. I see you there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we didn't really go one by one through the indicators. We had a more general discussion, but what came out first was, well, you need to have a profitable project, so you won't have any initiatives if it's not profitable. And I think what you mentioned before, Warren, about the cost of CO2 mitigation, I think if there is a CO2 pricing, we didn't talk about it, but I think if the CO2 pricing makes it profitable, I think that's also something that comes in there.
Yep.
Of course, that's for the capital which is brought in by the investors. On the other hand, you also have the community. So you have the labor, you have the land which are there, and that's more about community benefits. And I think that was brought up a lot, that there can be trade-offs between those. So you have investors who are looking at maximal profitability. On the other side, that doesn't necessarily mean that the community has maximum benefits around it. So I think those two next to each other are important to weigh. I think what's also mentioned was comparing situations before and after analysis, and then things like transient land prices is maybe something that can be brought up. Land use, but that's then more in the social indicators and maybe environmental indicators. And let me think, there's something, and yeah, the scale is something that came back a few times also. So for profitability, economic profitability, you often want to have large scale, also depending on the market that you aim for. And on the other side, you can have more decentralized systems, localized, where people rely on their own resources for their energy production. So that also comes back to the community benefit a little bit, profitability versus community benefit. And again, it's difficult to make like a list of indicators that apply for everything. It requires a regional and project-based or topical approach or regional approach. And what works for evaluating a project doesn't necessarily work for evaluating this overall system and impacts on the whole country. So that's also another thing that should be taken. We talked about a lot, so it's difficult to extract anything else. I don't know if the others want to add something, if I forgot something.
Luke, can I just add?
Yeah.
We started off, Warren, with Keith talking about the question that wasn't asked, or, if something's going to be sustainable, is it financially sustainable?
Yeah.
And then that led us to discussing, if you're going to ask that question, then you start to pay attention to return on investment, which is the return to capital.
Yep.
Then you think about payments to labor. So that kind of covers off jobs, well-paying jobs. And then the thing that we don't typically think about, but is return to land or the natural capital or whatever. And it's going to depend on the system you have. And that would be useful things to collect, because then you could use that, as Luke was talking about, before and after baselines, comparing it to alternatives. And those kind of things then kind of form the basis for like land prices, changes around there, community benefits. But those are the kind of 3 starting points that one could then work your way through.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. So, Andrea, can you give a report back on your group?
Yeah, very interesting actually that we, our discussion was very much aligned with the discussion in group 3. I don't know if you were spying on each other, but I think the first thing we said is that really it's difficult to decide up front through a sort of top-down approach which indicators are most relevant. So we stress the importance of the local context and of the kind of concerns and priorities of local communities, or communities at regional level, or of the different levels, and that will determine then what are the issues and the related indicators that are most important to look at. So there was a key message that came out of our discussion. In terms of then the specifics of the economic indicators, we thought that there were kind of 2 main dimensions. One, we call it economic viability, you call it economic profitability, but the concept is the same. So the need for investments to be sustainable economically and financially. And that's, of course, key for planning and for decision making at investment level. But then there's also the issue of, for those investments and those supply chains to be sustainable over time, you need local buy-in and local ownership of projects. And so you need stakeholders to be properly engaged, to feel that they have that there are benefits associated with these supply chains. And that is key to have over time a sustainable supply of biomass. There's of course also the issue of the local benefits, and we thought that indicator, which is currently called community benefit, maybe is a bit too general. So the importance of looking at impact on local GDP and contribution to the local economy was mentioned. So overall, I would summarize this way. So very difficult to decide up front what is most important, because that has to be defined locally. So it's more important to look at the process that would help you identify those relevant issues and the indicators that would measure them, as opposed to predetermining what those indicators should be. So having these indicators as a sort of menu of options that people can choose from, and methodologies linked to that to measure those indicators. And then 2 big areas of impacts to be addressed on the economic side. One is a kind of from a more private investment perspective, so profitability, viability, and the other one is local engagement, local buy-in, and local benefits, because those are important for the private and investment level, but also for local buy-in and local benefits for communities. So this is in a nutshell what we discussed.
Okay. So thanks for this. There's a couple things that I'm taking out of this part of the conversation. And so maybe I can take a second to summarize that and then to propose a different way to wrap out our meeting, because I'm looking at how many people are online and how many people might be able to take part. Biljana, yeah?
So sorry to interrupt your thoughts and flow of the meeting, but I have this moral issue because of this particle matter emissions came very high in your group of the social stuff. So from discussions that I am having is that this is more the matter like the tobacco industry in, I don't know, in 70s or 80s. I don't know when this ban started, but it is more awareness raising issue than bioenergy issue, because particle matter emissions happen in urban areas. I'm not talking about Africa. We don't talk about, like emerging economies with scarce energy systems. We talk about like a variety, or let's say Europe that tries to decarbonize. So it uses also bioenergy as one of the renewable energy sources. So to have these particle matter emissions in urban areas, you have it from traffic, just to say. Like, it's very simple. You get it from fuel oil combustion, from coal combustion, even more than from bioenergy. And there are known add-ons of technology to any combustion that could prevent. So you have flue gas condensers, you have percolate with water that will go also and take over so these are more effective for the small scale. So there are technological solutions. It's not like, like we cannot do anything about it. It is more raising awareness issue than really bioenergy issue, because this happens to other combustion technologies. Bioenergy, because it's fuel, unless fuel less renewables, they don't have this issue. But I think it is if we talk about modern energy systems, it is particle matter, because all urban areas, they have air pollution control. So you cannot get a license to build a plant if it's going to go against that. And changing to renewable from fossil, I think, is always better option. So, I mean, that's why I sorry to interrupt, but because it came so high, particle matter, but discussions that we are having is that everybody likes to live. So who is going to invest? And who is going to buy a indoor stove on bioenergy that is going to cut the life? The life expectancy. So I just wanted to contribute to this. I don't know if it's relevant, but this is the discussions that we have where I come.
No, I think this is helpful, and it does tie into what I see as maybe the last thing we might do with our group today. So originally we had planned to do a second breakout, and we were going to ask you to go through challenges and opportunities around the different indicators themselves. I'd like to modify that. Rather than going to a breakout, I think I'd rather just go around the table that we have now. We've lost a number of people from the first round, and I think that it might be more effective for our time if we all just talk to each other. But before we do that, what I'd like to suggest is that, one of the really interesting outcomes of the conversation from the first table is this idea that local benefit has to be determined locally. And that goes back to things that Keith had said at the beginning, when we were having that conversation. It comes back to the idea that it's very context related. I think that using the kind of indicator list that we have as a way of, I think, Andrea, you said a menu, right, for communities, the idea that they could pick the different sorts of things that were important to them, might be a better way to go about doing this than trying to standardize things more. I very much agree with what Biljana was saying in terms of there are technology options, and there are ways that some of these issues can be addressed. I think that what's interesting is that people are bringing their own lived experience and the challenges that they're facing in their day-to-day into the rankings that they're making, and that is informing what's being built out here. So again, it comes back to the idea of really standardizing an approach rather than standardizing an indicator. I would like to ask people to take a moment, because we've only really got about 15 minutes left in our session now. So if I can get people around the table to take a moment to identify a challenge and an opportunity around tracking these various indicators, I think that might be a useful way for us to wrap up the session today. And I can start, the biggest challenge is always getting access to consistent and, reliable data to inform any indicator that you might use. I think that so often we come up with a long list of things we want to measure, but we do not have access to consistent data to be able to measure it. And so, the world is littered with all kinds of indices and tools that people have developed to be able to better assess sustainability or viability, and we're just not able to move forward on them. Now, the solution that I've seen and that I think raises promise is working more closely with governments to develop certain data sets. And the data sets that I think are critical are the ones that are being proposed around the SDGs. Because these are things that government are using in multiple different reporting pathways. They may not be responsible per se because nobody is telling them they have to track it, but there's a lot of voluntary compliance to reporting and building out reports around the SDGs. And to me, this is the opportunity to be able to overcome that challenge of data availability, working with governments to be able to create the better data sets that we need to be able to monitor what's going on. Would anybody like to jump in, or should I just start picking people to give us an idea of challenges and opportunities?
Warren, may I ask you
Yep.
just a question?
Yep.
It's self-selecting, it's biased because people are presenting, but are any of the various, are there some kind of industry standards or ESG around some parts of the bioenergy sector that are useful, or is it still just sort of problematic because it's incomplete and it's supplemental?
No, there are a number of ways that industry is tracking their footprint and that governments are tracking. But I think that where we run into inconsistencies is in the methodology that's being applied. So, again, jobs is a good example. There's lots of different ways to count jobs or count employment. We're not necessarily using consistent approaches to do that. I think that bringing consistency to that reporting will be helpful in terms of us developing better assessments of the overall sustainability of these systems. I'm not saying that jobs is always the most important thing. That's just the example I'm using.
Yeah.
And I think that it's in that side, it's developing the methodologies that is probably more valuable than specific indicators themselves.
Good.
So do you have any challenges or opportunities, Harry?
I guess I would just simply, I would make couple comments, which would be the community benefit side. That's to track in a meaningful way just seems so difficult because presumably we're going to be relying on either, as you said, government data or perhaps company data. So I think what's a useful thing, and I think it goes back to Biana's point there, which would be an understanding of aspects of these different bioenergy systems, life cycle, greenhouse, the benefits and the costs, sort of the economic requirements. So like this system, capital intensive, not many jobs, but small land footprint. This one, lots of jobs, less capital intensive. And then the trade-offs will be on an environmental space. You can make your own decision as to how you want to weigh off those kind of like what you need from an economic, production. because those are going to fit to the relative context. But then how does this do on greenhouse gas emissions relative to other options? How into particulate? Because those are all going to be, again, yeah, the environmental benefits that have a social aspect, but and then those things get tracked at a higher level too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's about as much as I sort of provide the basics to give people a way to interpret, and then maybe you can track things at national levels or regional levels.
No, that's helpful. I appreciate that, Harry. Would anybody else like to jump into this conversation? I recognize that we're at the end of a long session and some people might be running out of gas. Pedro.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we have to be careful is redundancy, as Harry mentioned. I mean, he asked, but there's a lot of certification schemes, a lot of indicator sets that can be used for specifically for bioenergy. There was a project in 2013 called Global Biopact. It was a framework 7. I was part of that project, and we were talking exactly about this topic, 10 years ago. Like Keith said, 25 years ago, talking about the same thing. So maybe the challenge here is how to bring something new to the table. But also an opportunity is actually to bring something new if we can. My biggest problem is when people can, I mean, first of all, it is project and local differences, and that needs to be taken into account. But when is it enough, the indicators that they choose? Who's saying like these are the indicators that should be measured, or will they just measure the indicators they already have like good data? So that's basically my issue.
And I think this is a real concern, and I share your thoughts about trying to do something new in this space. This is a space that has been explored quite a bit, but without a lot of resolution at the end. We're not at the point where I think there's a lot of consistency. I really like the idea of allowing a community or a region to decide what the benefit should look like, and to let them, pursue different things in different places. I also think that it's important that we track it in a consistent manner across different systems, because otherwise things can become too chaotic. But yeah, the context piece is critical. Absolutely. Luke, and then Heather.
Yeah, was a little bit linked also to something which was said maybe by Petro in our group, is when you leave people free to say, well, this is an indicator set, and you can choose whatever you like to show what's your benefits.
Yeah.
That's well, people from the positive side or investor side will choose the things which are in favor for them.
Yeah.
And of course, opponents will choose the things which are fitting in their agenda. So it's also a little bit, and when you say, well, you can choose what you want to analyze, maybe you can say, well, these are aspects that you need to look at. If you look at communities, you should look at these and these aspects. Maybe that's kind of the framework that you need to look into. And maybe for certain indicators, they can say, well, this is really not relevant in our case, or it's not worth, or we really don't have data. But it's kind of the greenwashing which was brought up, the risk for greenwashing or blackwashing, if you like. So that's maybe something to take into account.
No, that's really important, and I think you're absolutely right. If everybody gets to pick exactly what they're going to use in all cases, then they will pick the things that make their projects or their systems look best, or worst, depending on their perspective. Yeah. So there does have to be some balance there, and how we achieve that is important. Heather, and then Biljana.
Thank you. So, I put a link to a media analysis in the chat, Because what I think is interesting is that unless you actually take a look at the case study, it's almost impossible to predict which social issues will be top of mind. And there's so many, and that's the way social issues are. So you can zoom in and identify what the key issues are for the community without bugging them necessarily. You can do these secondary things and look at viability. You don't have to bug a community if you know there's not enough wood there to be a viable thing. Nevertheless, the local community always has the final say. So they're the ones that say, okay, it's not economically viable. Despite that, we've got this vibrant biohub that's doing all these traditional uses, and we're using biomass to heat greenhouses and all these things that wouldn't be captured at scale for economists, but nevertheless is entirely real and entirely, like, that's a big story, right? So unless we get at the community level, then we're not going to be able to say. And the other thing is, I don't know how it is for other countries, but in Canada, it's very important that we don't speak for Indigenous people, because that's a process that's happened so often that their voices are taken away. So it's very important, the use of pronouns. Who should say? It's not us, it's them. So just a few points just to make it so that our bioenergy stuff generalizes to the communities that we're trying to reach. Thank you.
I think these are critical issues, and I really appreciate you adding the media analysis. That's very helpful. Thank you. Biljana and then Andrea.
So I would continue on Heather. So it is very different if a project is raising from the community and if it's imposed on the community. So it's very different, because you have this kind of social contract if it emerges from the community. So I mean, I would be scrutinized as a good neighbor, I don't know, the part of the community, if I malpractice if I challenge my credentials, I don't know. So even my kids, my family, my reputation will be gone. And it's different if somebody from outside with pockets full of money sees, this is a forested area, I've put the seeds of my pockets of money into this community and I will get even richer. So it's very different, the driver behind this. So because it is only the laws can prohibit this, and they have to be very scrutinized laws to prevent this kind of investments. But then again, how do you think that this person is so bad? This investor is so bad, are you overprotecting?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an investment. It's not a shame to earn money. So, but these two perspectives and these two drivers actually are very, very bringing different socioeconomic effects into the community, to my understanding, what Heather was saying. And that's universal.
Thanks for that. I agree. And Andrea, I'm going to go to you, and then I think we're going to wrap up because we're right at the end of our time.
Yeah, maybe just a thought or a question, since this work is also supposed to inform possible future work by IEA Bioenergy, is whether there is some usefulness in thinking about some work that will lead to the identification of a sort of methodology. So looking more at the process rather than the indicators themselves. In line with this, there's also a standard out there, as Keith mentioned, but I don't know to what extent that standard or other methodologies that are out there are differentiated by type of bioenergy supply chain. Because as you know, bioenergy means a lot of different things, right? It's very different types of feedstocks, different types of processing for different types of end users. So whether there would be some merit and value in having a sort of framework approach, but then sort of matrices and what is relevant, also at which level, because also in our discussion, I didn't actually mention that before, but we were a little bit, some of the indicators we're looking at, kind of more at project level, other were like a macro level, where attribution would be very difficult actually. But it's like which level are we looking at, and depending at which level, different sets of indicators would be applicable. And then again, to be defined locally which ones are relevant, but the menu, let's say, would be different depending on the scale, and also depending on the type of bioenergy that we are looking at. So are we looking at use of residues from forestry? Are we looking at so-called energy crops? Are we looking at feedstocks that are used for improved stoves at local level, or cogeneration? So again, very different types of bioenergy, and so maybe that could be something useful if it hasn't already been done, defining this kind of general framework, and then having a more granular approach and further developing it for different typologies of bioenergy and the different scales.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I see the comments again, Heather. Thanks for that. I'm highly conscious that it is now 1 minute to the hour, and that we are supposed to be done at the hour. So I'll take a moment just to say thank you so much for everyone's input and participation today. It's very helpful, and this all will go in to inform the report that we're putting together, and I think that will be made available through the IEA Bioenergy page so that everybody can get access to it at the end of the process. A lot of really great ideas and great conversation. So I really appreciate the effort that people have put in. And maybe I'll turn over to Luke for a last word.
Yeah. Also from my side, really thanks to everybody who joined the discussions. I think I also learned quite a lot. So I think there's quite a number of things which are really a good add-on also to the reports. And as mentioned by you, and also mentioned before, and by Andrea also, this feeds in potential new work in IEA Bioenergy, where we also want to focus more on socioeconomics, also looking at the biomass sourcing and all the impacts that are related to that. So I think that's quite important to put that in also, and get things straight on where we can focus on in our group. So thanks everybody.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Thanks everyone.
I made some recordings. I think Ernesto also. Andrea, you mentioned that you didn't have recording of your session. Well, I hope I can find my recordings.
Yeah, sorry, I realized how full I know that I needed to clean up some stuff, but my memory was full, so it couldn't record. But I can provide a written summary of what we discussed. But I think we kind of what we said was pretty much what we discussed. But I can provide that in writing. Apologies for that.
That'd be great. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you may be.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.